let's take these basic gray scraps that I have and see what kind of cards we can turn them into. Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. It is time for the Bringing Back Basic Gray collaboration. This is just a small collab that I do with my friend Sarah, who is Crafting and Relaxing here on YouTube, Kathy, who is Stampin' Cat over on Instagram, and each month we just take some of the basic gray papers we have in our stash. Basic Gray made papers back kind of in the early 2000s, and they no longer make paper. They have transitioned to fabric. But we found that we all had a love for Basic Gray. And at the time, Basic Gray kind of had a different look than a lot of other scrapbook papers. They kind of had a little bit of an aged or grunged look to them. The patterns were a little different than what else was out at the time as well. So we found that we all had a love for it, and when Basic Gray stopped making paper, we started to hoard it. So we decided to just pull some out each month and play with it and enjoy it. So in the spirit of what I've been doing the last couple of months, I have been working through like the seasonal scraps that I have left, which weren't a lot. I did it for Halloween, I did it for fall, and so this month I've pulled out, I had a few like specific Christmas patterns, and then I had some other scraps where I just pulled because of the red, like not Christmas, but can be Christmas. And then I have some other scraps here too. And so my goal is to take these scraps and to make at least one card, if not more. We don't plan to use up all of the Basic Gray in our stash each month. Like, there's nothing that we're trying to use up. It's just, for me, I'm trying to kind of clean up what's in my bag because I've saved every scrap, it seems. And so I'm just trying to kind of clean up what's in my Basic Gray stash. So it just makes it easier for me to work with it going forward. So that is the plan. Let's see where it leads. If you've seen any of my recent videos, you will have seen me use this postcard style. Just trying to make some thank you cards that I can put with our online orders, and we normally just do like handwritten postcards as thank yous. This first card came together pretty quickly because I started with that big square piece and then just kind of threw the rest of those scraps on there. The second card, I knew I wanted to use these strips, and so I'm trying to figure out a kind of a pattern that I like with the strips. I wanted to add one more on the top, so I did cut one of those in half. And then I originally had this set like configured as vertical card and realized that rectangle up in the top right that I want to use is going to have to go on horizontally. So trying to make sure that those two strips that actually have an orientation aren't vertical. So I also wanted to try and use that triangle, and when I put it with the rectangle, I realized it's a house. Not what I was going for, so I'm going to try and use it a different way, but I can't figure out how to make it work. So after all that fiddling and rearranging of those strips, I finally have the pattern that I like, so now I'm just trying to scooch them into what happened to be the perfect position for me at the time, and I'm going to start adhering those down. I try to clear out scraps every so often, just so that whenever, God forbid, I get down to the very end of my Basic Gray, I'm not left with an entire giant bag full of just scraps. So it's kind of good that I go through it I think like once a year I try and go through and use some of the scraps. Now that I have those glued down, I'm going to trim off the extra pieces. I'm going to save the longer pieces, but those little tiny ones I'm cutting off now, I'm not going to save. And then I want to use that rectangle. I had pulled out an extra red scrap in case I needed it to do some matting, and so I'm trying to figure out if I want to use it or not. Now I'm going to go back to that first card and start gluing it down. I wanted to kind of lay out both cards before I started gluing, just to make sure that I didn't want to put everything on that first card if I might need something on that something else on that second card. But this little piece here is a little strip cluster I had made a few years ago trying to clean up scraps. So I'm glad I can finally put it to use. I realized I had put that one big rectangle down and wanted to put this little strip behind it to try and use that up. I do have a sponsor for today's video, and it's Vevor. They sent me a die cutting machine, and I got the machine. There was the handle there. There is the platform, transparent adapter plate, and then there are 2 clear cutting plates, and then an extra plastic sheet that you can use as a shim. They also included in this kit, or in this bundle, an embossing folder, trying to get it so you can see the pattern there, and then a small set of dies with some basic shapes, and then there are 10 papers that you can use to die cut with. And so I am going to be trying it out today, cutting some embellishments for our cards. I'm trying to give you an idea here of the size. It's about 12 inches long and over 6 inches wide. It does have a 6-inch opening for you, like so you can die cut up to a 6-inch sheet of paper. It's shorter than my Sizzix, but wider. So I have some dies that I'm going to use to cut my sentiments. I have Happy Holidays from Stamps of Life, and I'm going to use the Vevor die cutting machine to cut it out, and I'm going to put the die down face up and then the paper face down on top of it, run it through, and this is like the first time I've really cut with it, so I did run it through like both directions, but I didn't need to. I realized it cut on that first pass. So on all of my other die cuts that I make, I just use one pass and it cuts perfectly. So I'm trying to figure out like that layout. This die has a kind of matte piece and then the individual words. So I wanted a color for the matte, and so now I'm just going to use some white cardstock to cut out the Happy Holidays. Again, putting the die in face up with the cardstock on top. And right there you can see it kind of popped out in, before I even take the plate off, you can kind of see it separated so that you can tell that it was a good cut. Easy as that. I'm also going to be using another die for my next card. It is from Fun Stamper's Journey, I think is what it was called. And I'm just using the word joy. Again, putting it in face up with the cards or my paper face down, running it through once, and then I just need to pop it out. It's one of those kind of deep dies that the paper tends to not come out of easily. And I'm going to be using joy on my first card. And so I cut it out of some of that red pattern paper, but then I realized that I'm going to need to offset it with some white so that it can stand out. So I'm going to set that aside. I end up coming back to it later off camera and cutting another layer, just because I don't like the way the joy looked with just the red and white. But my thought is to kind of offset it a little bit so you can kind of see a white outline around the joy. Okay, moving back to the second card. I am bouncing back and forth today. I'm going to go ahead and glue my Happy Holidays onto the matte piece so that I can let that set. And then I am going to, somewhere off camera already, I have cut a green layer of joy, and so I'm going to offset the white onto the green, and then I'm going to offset the red onto the white. So you're going to see all three colors kind of slightly offset from each other. It just helps it stand out a little bit more. I tried putting an oval or some white cardstock behind it with just the red, but I don't know, I didn't like it. So I wanted to do something a little more subtle. I tried to use that triangle again. It didn't work. Trying to figure out what I want to do with this rectangle piece. I finally decide I'm going to use the strip just to kind of ground it a little bit. And so I'm going to add some adhesive onto the bottom of the rectangle, put the strip on, and then I've already got an angle cut on the left hand side, so I'm going to cut the same angle on the right hand side. I still don't like it. It still needs something to help it kind of, I could have gotten up and gotten some ink to ink the edges, but I was feeling lazy. And so I decided to make it hard on myself. I'm going to back it with this white cardstock. I was just measuring my rectangle piece so I could cut my cardstock about a 1/4 inch bigger. So you're not going to see the white cardstock on the bottom. You're just going to see it on the top and the 2 sides. So now I'm going to go ahead and layer these 2 pieces up. And I am using some kind of like a light gray cardstock for my bases here, my postcard bases. So I think that's kind of why the white, I wasn't loving the too much white showing. So then I also ended up adding a white layer underneath the Happy Holidays, again, just to highlight it a little more. By the way, I will have a link for the Vevor die cutting machine in the description box below for you. There's also a coupon code for 5% off. They did have a pre-Black Friday sale. It ended right before this video is being released. So I'm assuming they will also have some Black Friday sales that you can watch for if you like the machine. It did work really well for me. So you feel free to check that out. And then I finally figured out where I wanted to put that joy sentiment on card number 1. Jumping back to card number 2 to add that little banner from a scrap that I found on my desk, and then I found another little blue scrap, so I'm going to use that as well. The first card needed a little something else, and so I end up bringing in some vinyl circles. These are just some little circles that I had cut from some scrap vinyl. I tend to use these a lot as non-dimensional enamel dots. And I just wanted to bring in a little bit more of that white, but not a whole bunch of white in one area. I add these 2 little banner pieces down. And my cards are finally done, and those are the scraps that I had left. They will be put back into my stash. Again, please check out the description box for links to Kathy and Sarah to see the projects that they made this month, as well as the links to Vevor. Thank you so much for your time today, and hope you all have a very crafty day.